Recently, a guy named Zach Bitter, who's a high school teacher in Michigan, set a record for running 100 miles. He did it on a track, by the way, around it, 400 laps. But he ran 100 miles in 11 hours and 47 minutes and set a U.S. record. The guy in the middle is Sergeant Mike Morton in the U.S. Army. He's 43 years old, and he's set an American record for 24 hours, and he ran 172 miles in 24 hours on a low-carb fueling strategy. Donald O'Neill, who lives here in Cape Town and had done the movie Serial Killers 1 with Professor Noakes a couple of years ago, and he came out and chronicled a trans-Pacific row by Sami Inken and his wife Meredith Loring. They got in a rowboat in California, rowed to Hawaii in 45 days, unsupported, so no resupply in the middle. And the previous record for a two-person boat from California to Hawaii was 60 days, and they did it in 45 days, taking 15 days off the all-time record, and they did it on a low-carb diet. Now, people will say, oh, that's great, Steve, but we know athletes will be willing to do anything to set a record, to get a medal. They use drugs like amphetamines that runners and cyclists have died by taking drugs because they want to enhance performance. And we all know that these people will do anything, even if it threatens their life. So maybe they're doing this, but it's going to kill them earlier in life. Is it dangerous? So I want to show you one study that was run by Jeff Volek's group. And I want to address some of the questions of danger. So he took a group of 40 people with metabolic syndrome, that's pre-diabetes, and he divided them into two groups. One group of 20 was put on a low-fat and low-saturated fat diet. You can't really see it, I'm sorry, that's up here. And the other group was on a low-carbohydrate, high-fat diet, and particularly high in saturated fats. And we did that on purpose. Low-fat diet was about 1,500 calories a day, and it was 56% carbohydrate, about 20% protein, and only 24% fat. So it's quite low fat, and it contained specifically 12 grams of saturated fat per day. The high-fat, low-carb diet was a little higher in protein, 28%, about 12% carbs, and 59% fat. But again, it was 1,500 calories a day, and people say, well, that isn't really that high. Remember, Thomson was eating 75 or 80%. But remember, this is 1,500 calories. These people are burning more than that. So a lot of their calories are coming from body fat. So actually what the body is burning is more than 59%. But the important point is 36 grams of saturated fat per day in this group, 12 grams of saturated fat per day in this group, and very big differences in the amount of carbohydrate. This shows you the weight loss for the two groups, and the dietary records there, or the dietary intakes. And as we typically see, and Dr. Westman has published multiple studies, and others have published studies of comparing these two diets for 3 months or 6 months or a year, you typically see more weight loss with the low-carb diet. And people say, well, it's just water weight. Well, in the first week or two, the water weights differ. But once you get out here, you get substantial differences in fat weight. So this is greater fat loss here than here. But what happens to the risk parameters? So-called bad cholesterol, LDL cholesterol, went up with the ketogenic, the low-carb diet, and went down with the low-fat diet. But these are very small changes on average in the LDL, and they were not statistically significant. LDL particle size is very important, and a 3% increase in LDL particle size is actually a highly significant difference, which means it reduces risk. HDL, the good cholesterol, went up markedly here, much more so than over here. Triglycerides, which are another measure of risk and particularly are markedly elevated with metabolic syndrome, they cut their triglycerides in half with the low carbohydrate diet. There is no drug that I can prescribe you as a physician that would get anything like this change in HDL and the reduction in triglycerides.